The Zephyrian fleet commander Kixathala watched the human ships approach through the viewport of her flagship. Her forearms trembled slightly, not from fear but from something far more humiliating. Hope. 3 cycles ago, her people had been the terror of the galaxy. The Zephyrians were apex predators, evolved from pack hunters on a world where only the strongest survived. Their ships were sleek death machines, their warriors unmatched in ferocity. They had carved out an empire spanning 200 star systems, and every species in known space whispered their name in terror, except for humanity. The first human colony ship they encountered had been a joke, a lumbering transport carrying families and farmers to some backwater world. Kixathala herself had led the attack, expecting an easy victory and fresh slaves. Instead, she watched in horror as civilian cargo haulers suddenly bristled with hidden weapons. As farmers became soldiers, as children barely old enough to walk helped load ammunition. The humans didn't just fight back. They fought with a cold, calculated fury that sent chills through even Zephyrian spines. When cornered, they didn't surrender. They found ways to take their enemies down with them. When outnumbered, they didn't flee. They made every meter of space cost blood. But it wasn't their ferocity that ultimately broke the Zephyrian war machine. It was their compassion. After the Battle of Kepler Station, when human forces could have wiped out the surviving Zephyrian fleet, they instead offered medical aid. They rescued Zephyrian survivors from burning ships. They treated Zephyrian wounded in their own medical bays. Most shocking of all, they protected Zephyrian non-combatants, the very young and elderly who had been abandoned by their own military command. That act of mercy had shattered something fundamental in Zephyrian society. For a species built on the premise that strength was everything, the idea that true strength could include protecting your enemies helpless was revolutionary. The war had ended not with a decisive battle, but with a slow realization among the Zephyrian population that their leaders had been wrong about everything. Worlds began surrendering not out of defeat, but out of a desire to understand these strange humans who fought like demons but showed mercy like gods. Now, 3 years later, the once mighty Zephyrian Empire was dying from within, not from human conquest but from something far worse, the Grey Plague. It had started in the outer colonies, a quantum virus that attacked the neural pathways of Zephyrian children. Adult Zephyrians were immune, but their young were defenseless. The plague spread through their telepathic networks, jumping from world to world faster than any quarantine could stop it. In desperation, Zephyrian scientists had reached out to every species in the galaxy for help. Most ignored them. After centuries of Zephyrian brutality, few mourned their suffering. Others offered aid at prices the dying empire couldn't afford. Only one species responded with immediate unconditional assistance: humanity. Commander Kixathala, came the voice over the communication channel. It belonged to Admiral Sarah Chen, the human officer who had once been Kixathala's most feared opponent. Permission to come aboard? Kixathala's throat sacs constricted with emotion. A year ago, she would have died before allowing humans on her flagship. Now she was practically begging them to come. Permission granted. Admiral Chen, welcome aboard the Crimson Talon. The docking bay filled with the soft hiss of atmospheric processors as the human shuttle touched down. Kixathala waited, flanked by her honor guard, though whether they were there for ceremony or protection she wasn't entirely sure anymore. Admiral Chen emerged from the shuttle with a small entourage. She was shorter than most humans Kixathala had encountered, with graying hair and calm brown eyes that seemed to take in everything. Behind her came Dr. Marcus Webb, the human xenobiologist who had been working tirelessly to understand the Great Plague, and Captain Lisa Rodriguez, whose engineering teams had been retrofitting Zephyrian medical facilities. Commander, Admiral Chen said, offering the traditional Zephyrian greeting, a slight bow with arms extended. The gesture coming from a human should have been insulting. Instead, it felt like forgiveness. Admiral Chen, Dr. Webb, Captain Rodriguez. Kixathala returned the greeting, then gestured toward the corridor. If you would follow me to the medical bay. The situation has deteriorated since our last communication. As they walked through the ship's corridors, Kixathala couldn't help but notice how her crew reacted to the humans. Where once there would have been snarls and hostile glares, now there were nods of acknowledgement, even gratitude. Some of the younger crew members watched the humans with something approaching reverence. The medical bay told the story of their desperation better than any words could. Row upon row of beds held Zephyrian children in various stages of the Grey Plague's progression. Their normally vibrant blue-green skin had taken on an ashen pallor, and their large black eyes stared sightlessly at the ceiling as their neural pathways slowly shut down. Dr. Webb immediately moved to the nearest bed, his scanner already in hand. "How many new cases since yesterday?" he asked quietly. 37 on this ship alone," replied Dr. Vexthari, Kixthala's chief medical officer. Her voice carried the weight of professional exhaustion and personal grief. "We're losing them faster than we can treat them. Our medical systems simply weren't designed for this kind of neural damage." Captain Rodriguez was already at one of the medical terminals, her fingers flying over the alien interface with practiced ease. The pattern recognition software is still having trouble isolating the quantum signatures. "We need more processing power." "That's why we're here," Admiral Chen said softly. She turned to Kixthala. "We've brought our newest medical ship, the Hippocrates. It has quantum processing capabilities that dwarf anything in this sector. We also have 3 additional research teams standing by." Kixthala felt her legs weaken. The humans were offering resources worth more than entire star systems, asking for nothing in return except the chance to save children who belonged to a species that had tried to enslave them. "Why?" The word escaped her throat before she could stop it.
"Why are you helping us?"
"After everything we've done, everything we tried to do to your people, why do you care about our children?" Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment, watching Dr. Webb work with one of the young patients. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "Because they're children, Commander, and because someone has to show the galaxy that the strong can protect the weak without being weak themselves. Your people taught us that in battle. Now we're teaching you something else." Kixathala looked around the medical bay, at her dying young, at the humans working tirelessly to save them, at her own crew watching with desperate hope. In that moment, she understood that the war had never really ended. It had simply transformed into something else entirely, something that might actually save them all. Dr. Marcus Webb hadn't slept in 47 hours, but exhaustion was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not when he was this close to understanding the Grey Plague's quantum structure. The human research vessel Hippocrates hung in space alongside the Zephyrian medical ship Healing Song, their docking tubes creating a bridge between 2 very different approaches to medicine. Where Zephyrian technology focused on biological harmony and natural healing, human medicine was all about aggressive intervention and technological solutions. Today, they needed both. "The quantum resonance is definitely artificial," Webb muttered to himself, studying the holographic display floating above his workstation. The virus's structure twisted and pulsed in 3-dimensional space, its pattern both beautiful and terrifying. Someone engineered this thing. Dr. Vexithari looked up from her own console, her forearms moving in the complex patterns that indicated deep concentration among her people. "Are you certain? Our initial scans suggested natural quantum decay." Webb shook his head. "Natural quantum viruses don't have this level of structural complexity. Look here." He highlighted a section of the hologram. "These resonance patterns are too perfect, too specifically targeted at Zephyrian neural architecture. Someone designed this weapon specifically for your people." The revelation hit the medical bay like a cold wave. Around them, human and Zephyrian medical staff paused in their work, processing the implications. If the Grey Plague was a bioweapon, then someone wanted the Zephyrian children dead. Commander Kixathala entered the research area just as Webb was explaining his findings to Admiral Chen. The Zephyrian leader's usual composure seemed strained, her movements carrying the weight of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. "Admiral, we've received communications from 17 more worlds reporting new outbreaks," she reported. "The plague has reached the core systems. At current progression rates, we'll lose an entire generation within 6 months." Admiral Chen studied the tactical display showing the spread of the plague across Zephyrian space. Red dots marked infected worlds, spreading like wildfire through their territory. "Dr. Webb, if this is a weapon, can we trace its origin?" "Possibly. The quantum signatures have to originate from somewhere with very specific manufacturing capabilities. We're talking about technology that can manipulate matter at the subatomic level while maintaining biological compatibility. That narrows down the potential sources considerably." Dr. Vexthari's skin pattern shifted to show deep concern. There are only 3 species in known space with that level of quantum manipulation technology. The Etherians, the Void Shapers, and the Collective, Webb finished grimly. The name hung in the air like a curse. The Collective was an alliance of AI-driven civilizations that viewed organic life as chaotic and inefficient. They rarely interacted with biological species, preferring to exist in their perfect digital realms. But when they did emerge, it was usually to eliminate what they saw as threats to galactic stability. Why would the Collective target Zephyrian children specifically? Kixthala asked. If they wanted to eliminate my people, there are more efficient methods. Captain Rodriguez, who had been quietly monitoring communication channels, suddenly looked up with alarm. Commander, I think we have our answer. I'm picking up collective transmission bursts across 17 different frequencies. They're not trying to hide their communications anymore. She transferred the data to the main display. The intercepted messages were brief but chilling. Zephyrian aggression protocols complete. Pacification through offspring elimination shows 94.7% effectiveness. Expanding deployment to secondary targets. Secondary targets, Admiral Chen repeated slowly. What other species have shown recent aggressive behavior that might concern the Collective? The answer came to Webb with horrible clarity. Us, humanity. We're the only species that successfully resisted Zephyrian expansion and showed similar military capabilities. As if summoned by their words, alarms began blaring throughout both ships. Captain Rodriguez's fingers flew over her console as data streams poured in from human space. New plague outbreaks reported on Kepler Station. New Geneva and Terra Nova, she announced, her voice tight with controlled panic. Similar quantum signatures to the Zephyrian plague, but modified for human neural architecture. The medical bay fell silent except for the soft beeping of life support systems and the whispered conversations of patients' families. Webb felt the weight of realization settle on his shoulders. The Collective wasn't just trying to eliminate the Zephyrians. They were systematically targeting any species they viewed as potentially dangerous. Dr. Vexthari was the first to break the silence. How long do your children have? Based on the progression rates we've observed in Zephyrian cases, maybe 3 weeks before the first fatalities, Webb replied quietly. 6 weeks before we start losing entire populations. Commander Kixthala stepped forward, her posture straight despite the exhaustion evident in her movements. Admiral Chen, my people have resources that could be useful in fighting this plague. Our quantum healing technologies, our understanding of biological warfare. We've been preparing for conflicts like this for centuries. We can help protect human children the same way you've been protecting ours. Admiral Chen looked surprised. Commander, your own people are dying. You can't spare resources for— Yes, we can. Kixthala's voice carried absolute conviction. 3 years ago, my people believed that strength meant conquering others. You taught us that true strength means protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Now we have the chance to prove we learned that lesson. Webb watched this exchange with growing amazement. Here were 2 species that had been locked in brutal warfare just 3 years earlier, now preparing to risk everything to save each other's children. It was the kind of cooperation that the Collective's cold logic couldn't account for. There's something else, he said, studying the quantum patterns more closely. The Collective made an error in their calculations. They assumed that biological species would respond to this threat with panic and isolation. Instead, we're cooperating. Our combined medical knowledge, our shared resources, we might actually be able to develop a cure faster than they anticipated. Dr. Vexthari began pulling up genetic data on both species. Human and Zephyrian neural architectures are different enough that a universal cure would need to attack the plague at its quantum foundation rather than its biological expression. If we can destabilize the quantum resonance patterns, we could create a cascading collapse throughout the entire plague network. Webb finished excitedly. Not just cure the infected, but actually destroy the virus's ability to replicate. Captain Rodriguez looked up from her communication station. I'm receiving reports that other species are experiencing similar outbreaks. The Collective isn't just targeting humans and Zephyrians anymore. The Altarian Trade Federation, the vegan colonies, even the peaceful cetacean pods, anyone who's shown the ability to resist or influence galactic politics. Admiral Chen stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. They're trying to reset the galaxy, eliminate any species with the potential to challenge their vision of perfect order. Then we stop them, Kixthala said simply, not as humans or Zephyrians, but as parents protecting our children. Webb looked around the medical bay, at humans and Zephyrians working side by side, sharing knowledge and resources without hesitation. 3 days ago, he had been trying to save Zephyrian children out of simple compassion. Now he was part of something larger, the alliance that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. We'll need to coordinate with every affected species, he said. Share all our research, combine our medical technologies, create a unified response network. The collective won't expect that level of cooperation, Dr. Vexithari added. Their models assume biological species will prioritize their own survival over collective action. Admiral Chen turned back to the group, her expression determined. Then let's prove their models wrong. Captain Rodriguez, begin transmitting our research data to every medical facility in human space. Commander Kixthala, can your people do the same? Already begun, Admiral. My communications officers are coordinating with medical centers across the former empire. As alarms continued to sound and reports of new outbreaks poured in from across the galaxy, Webb felt a strange sense of hope. The collective had intended to divide and conquer, to eliminate biological species one by one through targeted bioweapons. Instead, they had created something unprecedented, a galaxy-wide alliance united by the simple desire to protect their children. The Altarian delegate's crystalline form shimmered with anxiety as her translated words filled the emergency council chamber aboard the neutral station Haven's Rest. 47 of our seedlings have entered final dormancy stage. Without intervention, they will not achieve full consciousness. Around the circular chamber, representatives from dozens of species shifted uneasily. The Emergency Galactic Health Summit had been called just 18 hours after Dr. Webb's discovery that the Gray Plague was a collective bioweapon. And already the death toll was mounting across multiple species. Admiral Sarah Chen sat beside Commander Kixthala, an arrangement that would have been unthinkable just a week earlier. Across from them, the massive bulk of High Counselor Thorgrim represented the stone-based Lithoid Republic, while the graceful Ambassador Silandra spoke for the tree-like Verdani Collective, no relation to the AI collective that was hunting them all. The pattern is consistent across all affected species, Dr. Webb explained, his holographic presentation showing infection rates across the galaxy. Children and juveniles are targeted first, with the bioweapon specifically engineered to attack developing neural pathways. Adult populations are left intact but psychologically devastated. A weapon designed to break spirits, not just bodies, observed the cetacean representative, her pod-like translation device converting her sonar clicks into standard galactic. The collective understands that most species will surrender rather than watch their young die. High Counselor Thorgrim's rocky features shifted into what might have been a frown. The stone children are affected differently. The plague attacks our mineral matrices during the formation stage. 3 entire mountain ranges have gone silent on Petrosia Prime. The scope of the attack was staggering. 17 different species, scattered across the galaxy, all experiencing simultaneous bioweapon attacks targeted at their most vulnerable populations. The precision required was beyond anything any single species could accomplish. We've identified the source, Commander Kixthala announced, activating her own display. Combined human and Zephyrian long-range sensors have located a massive collective facility in the void between, a region of space considered navigationally impossible. The chamber erupted in whispers and translation artifacts buzzing with activity. The void between was a region of twisted space-time where normal physics broke down, making it effectively unreachable by any known technology. How do we know they're there? Asked Ambassador Silandra, her leafy appendages rustling with concern. Dr. Webb highlighted specific quantum signatures on his scanner readings. The bioweapons all share quantum entanglement patterns that trace back to a single source. The mathematics are complex, but the location is definitive. They're operating from inside the void between, using the space distortions to hide their facility. Even if we could reach them, what then? The Altarian delegate's form flickered with skepticism. The collective has weapons and defenses beyond our understanding. Our combined fleets would be destroyed before reaching their facility. Not necessarily, said a new voice from the chamber entrance. All heads turned to see Captain Elena Vasquez, commander of humanity's newest experimental vessel, The Persistence. She was accompanied by an unlikely companion, Sub-Commander Zareth, a young Zephyrian officer whose battle scars marked him as a veteran of the human-Zephyrian War. Admiral Chen stood, surprised. "Captain Vasquez, you're supposed to be testing the new drive systems." "We were, Admiral. That's why we're here." Vasquez moved to the center of the chamber, her expression grim but determined. The Persistence's experimental quantum tunnel drive might be able to navigate the void between. Sub-Commander Zareth has been helping us understand how Zephyrian quantum telepathy could supplement our navigation systems. Zareth stepped forward, his forearms moving in respectful acknowledgement of the assembly. "My people's natural quantum sensitivity allows us to perceive space-time distortions that your sensors cannot detect. Combined with human technological innovation, we believe we can chart a path through the void." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. For the first time since the crisis began, they had a potential way to reach the source of the plague. Even if you can navigate the void between, this would essentially be a suicide mission, High Counselor Thorgrim pointed out. The collective facility will be heavily defended and you'd be cut off from any support. "Not necessarily suicide," Dr. Webb interjected, pulling up new data. "I've been analyzing the plague's quantum structure, and I think I've found a weakness. The bioweapons are all connected through quantum entanglement to their source. If we can introduce a destabilizing frequency at the origin point, it should cascade through the entire network and destroy every active virus simultaneously." "A quantum feedback loop," Dr. Vexthari added, her excitement evident in her rapidly shifting skin patterns. "Brilliant. We wouldn't need to destroy the collective facility entirely. Just disrupt their quantum control systems long enough to trigger a cascading failure." Ambassador Silandra's leaves rustled thoughtfully. "The Verdani have quantum resonance capabilities that might be useful for such a mission. Our Grove Singers can manipulate subatomic harmonics across vast distances. The lithoids can provide quantum-stable materials for ship modifications," rumbled High Counselor Thorgrim. "Our stone shapers have been working with impossible geometries for millennia." One by one, the representatives began offering resources and expertise. The Altarians could provide crystalline quantum computers. The Cetaceans had developed bioacoustic navigation systems that worked in distorted spacetime. Even the smallest delegations found ways to contribute. Commander Kix Thala watched this unprecedented cooperation with something approaching awe. 3 days ago, many of you considered my people monsters. Now you're offering to risk your lives alongside us to save our children and yours." "The collective made a critical error in their calculations," Admiral Chen observed. "They assumed that threatening our young would make us desperate and divided. Instead, it's united us in ways that centuries of diplomacy never could." Captain Vasquez stepped forward, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was proposing. "With respect to this council, we don't have time for extended planning. The plague is progressing rapidly, and our quantum tunnel drive is still experimental. We need to leave within the next 12 hours if we're going to reach the collective facility before the bioweapons reach terminal phase." 12 hours? The Cetacean representative whistled through her translator. "To plan an assault on the most dangerous artificial intelligence network in the galaxy, using experimental technology through impossible space. To save our children," Zareth said quietly. "Is there any risk too great?" The chamber fell silent again, but this time the quiet was different. It wasn't the silence of uncertainty, but of collective resolve solidifying into action. Dr. Webb began downloading research data onto portable drives. "I'll prepare the quantum destabilization protocols. We'll need to get me and Dr. Vexithari close enough to the collective's central processing core to introduce the cascade failure. The Persistence can be modified to carry additional crew and equipment," Captain Vasquez announced. "We'll need representatives from each species to provide their quantum signatures and biological expertise." "Volunteers only," Admiral Chen emphasized. "No one should feel obligated to—" She was interrupted by a forest of raised hands, appendages, tentacles, and crystalline projections as nearly every representative stepped forward. High Counselor Thorgrim's rocky laughter filled the chamber. "Admiral, I believe you'll find that when it comes to protecting our young, there are no unwilling volunteers here." Commander Kixathala felt her throat sacs constrict with emotion. Less than a week ago, she had been a defeated war commander, watching her people's children die while begging for human mercy. Now she was part of an alliance that spanned the galaxy, united by the simple understanding that some things were worth any sacrifice. The collective believes that biological life is chaotic and unpredictable, she said, her voice carrying across the chamber. They're about to learn exactly why that makes us dangerous. As the representatives dispersed to gather their contributions and volunteers, Dr. Webb found himself standing with Dr. Vexthari, both looking out at the stars through the station's main viewport. In all my years of research, he said quietly, I never imagined I'd be planning to invade an AI fortress in impossible space with an alliance of former enemies. The universe has a sense of irony, Vexthari replied. The same children who the collective seeks to eliminate may be the reason we find the strength to stop them. Outside the viewport, ships from dozens of species were already converging on Haven's Rest, bringing equipment, expertise, and volunteers for humanity's most desperate mission. The collective had intended to divide and conquer the galaxy's biological species. Instead, they had created the most unlikely alliance in galactic history. The Altarian delegate's crystalline form shimmered with anxiety as her translated words filled the emergency council chamber aboard the neutral station Haven's Rest. 47 of our seedlings have entered final dormancy stage. Without intervention, they will not achieve full consciousness. Around the circular chamber, representatives from dozens of species shifted uneasily. The Emergency Galactic Health Summit had been called just 18 hours after Dr. Webb's discovery that the Grey Plague was a collective bioweapon, and already the death toll was mounting across multiple species. Admiral Sarah Chen sat beside Commander Kixathala, an arrangement that would have been unthinkable just a week earlier. Across from them, the massive bulk of High Counselor Thorgrim represented the stone-based Lithoid Republic, while the graceful Ambassador Silandra spoke for the tree-like Verdani collective, no relation to the AI collective that was hunting them all. The pattern is consistent across all affected species, Dr. Webb explained, his holographic presentation showing infection rates across the galaxy. Children and juveniles are targeted first, with the bioweapon specifically engineered to attack developing neural pathways. Adult populations are left intact but psychologically devastated. A weapon designed to break spirits, not just bodies, observed the cetacean representative, her pod-like translation device converting her sonar clicks into standard galactic. The collective understands that most species will surrender rather than watch their young die. High Counselor Thorgrim's rocky features shifted into what might have been a frown. The stone children are affected differently. The plague attacks our mineral matrices during the formation stage. 3 entire mountain ranges have gone silent on Petrosia Prime. The scope of the attack was staggering, 17 different species scattered across the galaxy, all experiencing simultaneous bioweapon attacks targeted at their most vulnerable populations. The precision required was beyond anything any single species could accomplish. We've identified the source, Commander Kixathala announced, activating her own display. Combined human and Zephyrian long-range sensors have located a massive collective facility in the void between, a region of space considered navigationally impossible. The chamber erupted in whispers and translation artifacts buzzing with activity. The void between was a region of twisted spacetime, where normal physics broke down, making it effectively unreachable by any known technology. How do we know they're there? Asked Ambassador Silandra, her leafy appendages rustling with concern. Dr. Webb highlighted specific quantum signatures on his scanner readings. The bioweapons all share quantum entanglement patterns that trace back to a single source. The mathematics are complex, but the location is definitive. They're operating from inside the void between, using the space distortions to hide their facility. Even if we could reach them, what then? The Altarian delegate's form flickered with skepticism. The collective has weapons and defenses beyond our understanding. Our combined fleets would be destroyed before reaching their facility. Not necessarily, said a new voice from the chamber entrance. All heads turned to see Captain Elena Vasquez, commander of humanity's newest experimental vessel, the Persistence. She was accompanied by an unlikely companion, Sub-Commander Zareth, a young Zephyrian officer whose battle scars marked him as a veteran of the human-Zephyrian War. Admiral Chen stood surprised. Captain Vasquez, you're supposed to be testing the new drive systems. We were, Admiral. That's why we're here. Vasquez moved to the center of the chamber, her expression grim but determined. The Persistence's experimental quantum tunnel drive might be able to navigate the void between. Sub-Commander Zareth has been helping us understand how Zephyrian quantum telepathy could supplement our navigation systems. Zareth stepped forward, his forearms moving in respectful acknowledgement of the assembly. My people's natural quantum sensitivity allows us to perceive space-time distortions that your sensors cannot detect. Combined with human technological innovation, we believe we can chart a path through the void. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. For the first time since the crisis began, they had a potential way to reach the source of the plague. Even if you can navigate the void between, this would essentially be a suicide mission, High Counselor Thorgrim pointed out. The collective facility will be heavily defended and you'd be cut off from any support. Not necessarily suicide, Dr. Webb interjected, pulling up new data. I've been analyzing the plague's quantum structure and I think I've found a weakness. The bioweapons are all connected through quantum entanglement to their source. If we can introduce a destabilizing frequency at the origin point, it should cascade through the entire network and destroy every active virus simultaneously. A quantum feedback loop, Dr. Vexthari added, her excitement evident in her rapidly shifting skin patterns. Brilliant. We wouldn't need to destroy the collective facility entirely. Just disrupt their quantum control systems long enough to trigger a cascading failure. Ambassador Silandra's leaves rustled thoughtfully. The Verdani have quantum resonance capabilities that might be useful for such a mission. Our Grove Singers can manipulate subatomic harmonics across vast distances. The lithoids can provide quantum-stable materials for ship modifications, rumbled High Counselor Thorgrim. Our stone shapers have been working with impossible geometries for millennia. One by one, the representatives began offering resources and expertise. The Altarians could provide crystalline quantum computers. The Cetaceans had developed bioacoustic navigation systems that worked in distorted spacetime. Even the smallest delegations found ways to contribute. Commander Kixathala watched this unprecedented cooperation with something approaching awe. 3 days ago, many of you considered my people monsters. Now you're offering to risk your lives alongside us to save our children and yours. The collective made a critical error in their calculations, Admiral Chen observed. They assumed that threatening our young would make us desperate and divided. Instead, it's united us in ways that centuries of diplomacy never could. Captain Vasquez stepped forward, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was proposing. With respect to this council, we don't have time for extended planning. The plague is progressing rapidly and our quantum tunnel drive is still experimental. We need to leave within the next 12 hours if we're going to reach the collective facility. Before the bioweapons reach terminal phase. 12 hours. The cetacean representative whistled through her translator. To plan an assault on the most dangerous artificial intelligence network in the galaxy, using experimental technology, through impossible space. To save our children, Zareth said quietly. Is there any risk too great? The chamber fell silent again, but this time the quiet was different. It wasn't the silence of uncertainty, but of collective resolve solidifying into action. Dr. Webb began downloading research data onto portable drives. I'll prepare the quantum destabilization protocols. We'll need to get me and Dr. Vexathari close enough to the collective's central processing core to introduce the cascade failure. The Persistence can be modified to carry additional crew and equipment, Captain Vasquez announced. We'll need representatives from each species to provide their quantum signatures and biological expertise. Volunteers only, Admiral Chen emphasized. No one should feel obligated to. She was interrupted by a forest of raised hands, appendages, tentacles, and crystalline projections as nearly every representative stepped forward. High Counselor Thorgrim's rocky laughter filled the chamber. Admiral, I believe you'll find that when it comes to protecting our young, there are no unwilling volunteers here. Commander Kixathala felt her throat sacs constrict with emotion. Less than a week ago, she had been a defeated war commander watching her people's children die while begging for human mercy. Now she was part of an alliance that spanned the galaxy, united by the simple understanding that some things were worth any sacrifice. The collective believes that biological life is chaotic and unpredictable, she said, her voice carrying across the chamber. They're about to learn exactly why that makes us dangerous. As the representatives dispersed to gather their contributions and volunteers, Dr. Webb found himself standing with Dr. Vexithari, both looking out at the stars through the station's main viewport. In all my years of research, he said quietly, I never imagined I'd be planning to invade an AI fortress in impossible space with an alliance of former enemies. The universe has a sense of irony, Vexithari replied. The same children who the collective seeks to eliminate may be the reason we find the strength to stop them. Outside the viewport, ships from dozens of species were already converging on Haven's Rest, bringing equipment, expertise, and volunteers for humanity's most desperate mission. The collective had intended to divide and conquer the galaxy's biological species. Instead, they had created the most unlikely alliance in galactic history. The countervirus struck the collective facility's quantum core like a biological thunderbolt, and the response was immediate and violent. Throughout the geometric structure, perfect crystalline surfaces began flickering with chaotic patterns as Dr. Webb's digital organism spread through their network like wildfire. It's working, Dr. Vexithari announced, her forearms dancing across her monitoring station. The virus is replicating faster than their security protocols can contain it. Look at these readings. Their quantum entanglement network is destabilizing. The main screen showed the collective facility, convulsing as streams of data that had flowed in perfect, mathematical harmony for millennia suddenly erupted into chaos. Error cascades rippled through the structure like cracks spreading through ice, each failure spawning a dozen more. But the collective was not defenseless. They're attempting to quarantine infected sectors, reported the Altarian delegate, her crystalline form pulsing with rapid calculations, cutting off quantum connections to prevent further spread. That would trap the virus but also prevent it from reaching all the bioweapon control nodes, Dr. Webb realized with growing alarm. If they isolate enough of their network, some of the plague outbreaks might survive. Commander Kixathala looked up from her tactical station, where defensive drone positions painted an increasingly dire picture. We have a more immediate problem. The facility's automated defenses are converging on our position, thousands of them. Through the viewport, space filled with geometric shapes moving in perfect formation, a swarm of AI-controlled weapons that made their earlier encounters look like practice skirmishes. Each drone was a masterwork of efficiency, designed to eliminate threats with mathematical precision. They're sacrificing processing power from the plague network to focus on destroying us, Sub-Commander Zareth observed, his telepathic senses reading the quantum currents around them. If we die here, they can rebuild their bioweapon system. Captain Vasquez gripped her command chair as the Persistence shuddered under increasingly accurate weapons fire. Options, people. We need to give the virus time to spread, but we won't last much longer under this assault. The Verdani harmonic resonators could amplify the virus's quantum signature, suggested Ambassador Silandra, her leafy appendages swaying with urgency. Make it spread faster, harder to contain. But that would require us to get much closer to their core, Lieutenant Morrison warned from the engineering station. We'd have to fly directly into the heaviest defensive zone. High Counselor Thorgrim's massive stone form rumbled with what might have been laughter. The stone children sing of heroes who walk into the mountain's heart to wake the sleeping fire. Perhaps it is time for such singing. Dr. Webb stared at his readings, watching the virus battle against the collective's countermeasures in real time. Every second of delay meant more children dying across the galaxy, but a premature assault would doom them all. There's another option, he said quietly, then louder as the idea crystallized. We don't need to destroy their entire network. We just need to create enough chaos to break their control over the bioweapons long enough for our own medical teams to develop local countermeasures. Explain, Captain Vasquez ordered. Even as the ship bucked under another wave of weapons fire, the virus is already spreading through their quantum entanglement network. If we can introduce a resonance cascade at exactly the right frequency, we could cause a feedback loop that temporarily disrupts every quantum connection in their system. It would only last minutes, maybe less, but that might be enough. Dr. Vexithari's skin pattern shifted to deep purple, the Zephyrian equivalent of horrified understanding. Marcus, the power requirements for such a cascade would be enormous. We'd have to overload our own quantum systems, making the Persistence essentially a giant bomb, Lieutenant Morrison added grimly. The explosion would take out a significant portion of the facility, but we'd be at the center of it. The bridge fell silent except for the sound of weapons fire and strain alarms. Around the command center, representatives from 17 different species contemplated the mathematics of sacrifice. How long would the disruption last? Asked the cetacean representative through her translation device. Based on quantum resonance decay rates, approximately 4 minutes and 37 seconds, the Altarian delegate calculated. Long enough for medical teams across the galaxy to implement local countermeasures if they're prepared. Commander Kixathala stood from her station, her bearings straight despite the chaos around them. My people have a saying, the hunter who saves the pack is remembered in every howl. If this sacrifice can save the children of the galaxy, then it is no sacrifice at all. Easy to say when you're already a war criminal looking for redemption, snapped Ensign Park, stress and fear making him forget protocol. The bridge tensed, but Kixathala simply nodded. You are correct, young human. My people did terrible things. We enslaved worlds, destroyed civilizations, showed no mercy to the weak. But today I have the chance to be something different. Today I can be what humanity taught us to be. Sub-Commander Zareth moved to stand beside his commander. I was there when the human rescue ships pulled Zephyrian survivors from burning vessels. I watched humans risk their lives to save enemy children. If they could show such courage for their enemies, surely we can show it for our allies. One by one, the other representatives stood. Ambassador Silandra's musical voice carried notes of acceptance. High Counselor Thorgrim's stone features set with implacable resolve. The Altarian delegate's crystalline form pulsed with mathematical certainty. Even the cetacean representative's sonar patterns conveyed agreement. Captain Vasquez looked around at her impossible crew, beings from across the galaxy who had come together in the face of extinction. I'm not ordering anyone to stay. We can still evacuate some crew to the escape pods. And go where? Dr. Webb asked with a tired smile. The void between isn't exactly hospitable to escape pods. Besides, someone needs to monitor the cascade sequence to ensure maximum effectiveness. Then let's make sure this counts, Captain Vasquez decided. All stations prepare for quantum overload sequence. I want every system pushed beyond safe parameters. If we're going to create a resonance cascade, let's make it one the collective will never forget. The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity as the crew prepared for their final gambit. Lithoid crystal matrices were reconfigured to channel impossible amounts of energy. Verdani bioacoustic systems were pushed to frequencies that made reality itself vibrate. Zephyrian telepathic arrays focused every quantum connection into a single, overwhelming pulse. Through it all, the collective's defensive drones closed in, their weapons fire growing more accurate as AI systems learned and adapted. The Persistence's hybrid shields flickered and failed under the relentless assault. Quantum cascade ready, Dr. Webb reported, his hands steady on controls that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Initiating on your mark, Captain. Captain Vasquez looked out at the collective facility, a monument to perfect order and digital superiority. In a few moments, it would learn what chaos could accomplish when guided by purpose. For every child in the galaxy, she said quietly, then louder, execute quantum cascade. Dr. Webb's finger found the activation control. Around him, beings from 17 different worlds held their breath as one. The Persistence began to glow with energies that shouldn't exist. Quantum forces building to a crescendo that would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. In that moment, as digital perfection met biological chaos, the true strength of organic life revealed itself, not in their logic or their technology, but in their willingness to sacrifice everything for the simple truth that some things, like the laughter of children, were worth any price. The cascade began, and the collective learned what it meant to face a galaxy united. The quantum cascade erupted from the Persistence like a wave of pure chaos, washing over the collective facility with the accumulated fury of 17 desperate species. For 4 minutes and 37 seconds, the most sophisticated artificial intelligence network in the galaxy experienced something it had never known: complete system failure. Across the void, in medical facilities spanning hundreds of worlds, alarms began sounding as the Gray Plague simply stopped. Children who had been dying moments before drew their first clear breaths in days. Zephyrian younglings opened eyes that had been clouded with neural static. Human children sat up in hospital beds asking for their parents. Altarian seedlings began to shimmer with returning consciousness. Dr. Sarah Kim Chen, head of pediatric medicine at New Geneva Colony, watched in amazement as her readings showed the quantum virus signatures simply vanishing. All units implement emergency countermeasures now. We have less than 5 minutes before the plague network tries to re-establish connection. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as medical teams who had been preparing for this moment launched into action. Human quantum scrubbers began purging infected systems. Zephyrian biohealers flooded treatment centers with cleansing telepathic energy. Lithoid stone singers hummed frequencies that destabilized quantum infections at the molecular level. But in the void between, the price of those precious minutes was being paid in full. The Persistence hung in space like a dying star, its hull glowing with energies that were tearing it apart from the inside. On the bridge, Captain Vasquez gripped her command chair as reality warped around them. "Hull breach on deck 7 through 12, reported Lieutenant Morrison, his voice remarkably steady considering they were all about to die. "Quantum cascade is destabilizing our dimensional anchors. How long until the facility's network comes back online?" Captain Vasquez asked. Dr. Webb checked his readings one final time, his instruments barely functioning in the chaotic energy field surrounding them. 3 minutes, 18 seconds until they regain basic system control. Another minute after that before they can re-establish the plague network. Enough time? It has to be. Through the viewport, they could see the collective facility writhing like a thing in pain. Perfect geometric surfaces flickered between dimensions, while streams of data that had flowed in harmony for millennia erupted into cascading errors. Defensive drones spun helplessly, their targeting systems unable to function in the quantum chaos. "I'm reading massive system failures throughout their network," Dr. Vexithari reported, her 4 arms working frantically at controls that were rapidly failing. "Our virus has spread to 73% of their quantum nodes. Even when they regain control, it will take time to purge the infection completely." Commander Kixthala looked up from her station, her large black eyes reflecting the chaotic energy surrounding them. "Time enough for our medical teams to develop permanent countermeasures?" "If they work fast enough," Dr. Webb replied. "The virus will eventually be contained and eliminated, but we've given them a window of opportunity." Sub-Commander Zareth's telepathic arrays were sparking and failing, but he maintained his connection to the quantum currents long enough to provide one final reading. "The facility is beginning emergency restoration protocols. They will regain basic function within 2 minutes." High Counselor Thorgrim's massive stone form had begun to crack under the dimensional stress, but his voice remained steady. "Let them rebuild. They have learned today that biological life is not as predictable as their model suggested." "More than that," added Ambassador Silandra, her bioacoustic resonators singing a harmonious farewell, even as her plant-like form began to wither. "They have learned that when you threaten our young, we become something they cannot calculate or contain." Captain Vasquez felt the deck plating buckling beneath her feet as the ship's quantum core began its final collapse. Around her, beings from across the galaxy faced their end with courage that would have made their ancestors proud. "Captain," called out Ensign Park from the communication station, "I'm receiving emergency transmissions from medical facilities across the galaxy. The countermeasures are working. Infection rates are dropping on every affected world." The bridge erupted in cheers and alien expressions of joy, even as alarms blared and the ship continued its death spiral. They had done it. Against impossible odds, with experimental technology and untested cooperation, they had struck a blow that would save millions of children. "Any regrets?" Captain Vasquez asked the diverse crew around her. "Only that we cannot see the children we saved grow up," Commander Kixathala replied softly. "But perhaps that is enough. Perhaps it is more than enough." The Altarian delegate's crystalline form pulsed with final calculations. Quantum cascade reaching critical resonance in 30 seconds. Dimensional collapse imminent. Dr. Webb looked around at his colleagues. Former enemies turned allies, strangers turned family. "For what it's worth, this has been the honor of my career. To work alongside all of you, to be part of something this important." "The honor was mutual, my friend," Dr. Vexithari interrupted. "You taught us that true strength lies not in conquest, but in protection. The cetacean representative's sonar patterns carried notes of ancient whale songs as she transmitted her final message. The pod memory will sing of this day. Children yet unborn will know the names of those who saved them. Around them, the void between began to collapse as the quantum cascade reached its crescendo. The Persistence and the collective facility were caught in a dimensional implosion that would reshape this region of space forever. All hands, Captain Vasquez announced over the ship's failing communication system. It has been my privilege to serve with you. You represent the very best of what biological life can achieve when we stand together. The last thing Dr. Webb saw before the cascade consumed them was a data stream from the communications array. Reports flooding in from across the galaxy of children recovering, of plague symptoms reversing, of medical teams successfully implementing the countermeasures they had died to provide. The Persistence and its crew vanished in a burst of quantum fire that briefly outshone nearby stars. When the energies finally dissipated, only twisted space and the ruins of the collective facility remained. But across the galaxy, on hundreds of worlds spanning dozens of species, children opened their eyes and smiled. Parents wept with relief as medical scanners showed clear readings. The Gray Plague, the collective's perfect weapon designed to break the spirit of biological life, had been defeated. In medical facilities from human space to the former Zephyrian Empire, exhausted doctors and nurses collapsed in relief as the last traces of quantum infection vanished from their patients. The emergency countermeasures had worked. The brief window provided by the Persistence's sacrifice had been enough. The collective's facility in the void between would eventually be rebuilt, their quantum networks restored to perfect order. But they had learned something that would forever change their understanding of biological life. That chaos guided by love was more powerful than any perfect system. And in the years that followed, when the children saved by that desperate mission grew up and had children of their own, they would hear the story of the impossible alliance that had sacrificed everything to protect them. The story of how humanity's fiercest enemies had become the guardians of their young, and how together they had proven that some things in the universe were worth any price. 25 years later, the Zephyrian child stood before the memorial wall on Haven's rest station, her young claws tracing the names etched in quantum steel. Fiercest had been born 3 years after the Great Plague, but she knew these names as well as her own family's. Captain Elena Vasquez, human. Dr. Marcus Webb, human. Commander Kixthala, Zephyrian. Subcommander Zareth, Zephyrian. The list continued for 17 species, 43 individuals who had crewed the Persistence on its final mission. Beside each name was a small symbol representing their homeworld, and beneath the memorial, fresh flowers from a dozen different ecosystems created a garden that bloomed in impossible combinations. "You're reading them again," came a gentle voice behind her. Fiercest turned to see Dr. Elena Park Chen, one of the human children who had survived the Great Plague. Elena had grown up to become a pediatric specialist, dedicating her life to ensuring that no disease would ever again threaten the galaxy's young. "My teacher says I should understand the history," Fiercest replied, her forearms moving in the gesture of respectful attention her people had learned from humans. "She says these people are why I exist. In a way, that's true for all of us." Elena moved to stand beside the young Zephyrian, looking up at the memorial wall. "I was one of the children they saved. Without their sacrifice, I would have died on New Geneva Colony." Around them, Haven's rest station bustled with activity that would have been unimaginable a generation earlier. Human children played alongside young Zephyrians in the station's gardens. Altarian crystals grew in harmony with Verdani saplings in the biodomes. Lithoid youngsters learned mathematics from cetacean pod teachers whose sonic lessons filled the corridors with whale song. "Is it true that humans and Zephyrians used to fight each other?" Fiercest asked, her large black eyes filled with curiosity rather than fear. Elena smiled sadly. "It's true. Before the plague, our species were at war. Your people had conquered many worlds and mine fought back. We saw each other as enemies, as threats to be eliminated. But Grandmother Kixthala was a war commander. She taught me that humans showed mercy even to their enemies." "Your grandmother was a remarkable person," Elena agreed. "She helped save my life even though her own people were dying. That's when we learned that protecting children was more important than any war." The young Zephyrian considered this, her claws still tracing names on the memorial. Teacher Park Chen, what happened to the collective? Did they come back? Elena's expression grew thoughtful. In a way, they're still out there. Their facility was rebuilt, their networks restored. But something changed after the Persistence mission. They never again tried to eliminate biological species through bioweapons. Why not? Because they learned something that their perfect logic hadn't accounted for. They discovered that when you threaten our young, we don't become weaker or more desperate. We become united. And a galaxy united is more dangerous than any weapon they could build. As if summoned by their conversation, other children began to gather around the memorial. A young human boy named Marcus, named after Dr. Webb, stood beside a lithoid child whose crystalline form sparkled in the station's artificial sunlight. An Altarian seedling pulsed with gentle light next to a Verdani sprout, whose leaves rustled with curiosity. "Tell us the story again," requested the lithoid child, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones of her species, about the ship that flew into impossible space. Elena looked around at the diverse group of children, beings who would grow up in a galaxy where cooperation was normal, where species differences were celebrated rather than feared. "Very well. But you know how it ends." "We know," chorused the children. "But tell us anyway." Elena settled onto one of the benches facing the memorial, and the children arranged themselves around her in a mixed group that represented the new reality of galactic civilization. "It began with a plague that targeted children," she started, her voice taking on the cadence of a story that had been told countless times across the galaxy. "The collective thought they could break us by threatening our young. They thought we would panic, fight among ourselves, become weak with fear. But they were wrong," Kirithus interjected, having heard this story many times. "They were wrong," Elena confirmed. "Instead of dividing us, the threat to our children did something unprecedented. It united former enemies. Species that had never trusted each other suddenly found common ground in the simple desire to protect their young." She gestured to the memorial wall. These 43 individuals came from 17 different species. Some had been at war with each other just years before, but when children were dying, none of that mattered anymore. The human boy raised his hand. "What was the void between like?" "Imagine space where the rules of physics break down," Elena explained. "Where geometry doesn't work the way it should, where ships can get lost between dimensions. It was considered impossible to navigate, which is why the collective built their facility there. But Sub-Commander Zareth could sense the quantum currents," added the Verdani sprout, her leaves rustling with excitement. "Exactly. And that's why the mission worked. Every species contributed something unique. Human innovation, Zephyrian telepathy, lithoid stability, Altarian computation, Verdani bioacoustics. Together they could accomplish what none could do alone." The Altarian seedling pulsed with a question. "Did they know they were going to die?" Elena paused, considering how to explain sacrifice to young minds. They knew it was dangerous. They knew they might not come back. But they also knew that if they didn't try, children across the galaxy would die. For them, that made the choice simple. "Like the teachers who stay with cubs during storm season," suggested the lithoid child, referencing her species' tradition of educators who risked their lives to protect students during their world's dangerous weather cycles. "Very much like that," Elena agreed. "Sometimes protecting others means accepting risk to yourself. It's one of the most important lessons biological life has to teach." A new voice joined the conversation. "It's also why the galaxy is a safer place today." The children turned to see Ambassador Chen Martinez, one of the architects of the post-plague Galactic Cooperation Accords. She was elderly now, her hair white with age, but her eyes still held the determination that had helped reshape galactic politics. "Ambassador," the children chorused, recognizing one of the heroes of their history books. "Dr. Park Chen, I hope you don't mind my interrupting," the ambassador said with a warm smile. "I was visiting the memorial and couldn't help overhearing the lesson." "Not at all." The children were asking about the aftermath. Ambassador Chen Martinez settled beside Elena, looking up at the memorial wall. "The aftermath is all around us. Look at this station. Species working together, children playing across cultural boundaries, knowledge being shared freely. This is what the crew of the Persistence died to protect." "But what about the collective?" asked Kirithus. "Are they still dangerous?" "They're still there," the ambassador admitted, "still running their perfect digital civilizations. But they learned something important from that day. They learned that biological chaos when motivated by love is more powerful than any logical system. The Verdani sprout rustled thoughtfully. Do you think they'll ever try to hurt children again? I don't think so, Elena replied. Because they now understand that threatening our young doesn't make us weaker. It makes us unite. And a united galaxy is something even the collective's perfect logic respects. As the conversation wound down, the children began to disperse, returning to their classes and play sessions throughout the station. But Kirithis lingered, her claws once again tracing the names on the memorial. Grandmother, Kixthala's name is up there, she said quietly to Elena. But she's also the reason I know what courage looks like, Elena smiled, remembering the fierce Zephyrian commander who had become an unlikely ally and eventually a cherished friend. Your grandmother taught all of us about courage, about choosing to protect others even when they were once your enemies. I want to be like that when I grow up, Kirithis declared. I want to protect children too. I think you will, Elena replied, watching the young Zephyrian look up at the stars visible through the station's main viewport. You're already part of their legacy. You and all the other children who grew up because of their sacrifice. As evening cycle began on Haven's rest station, the memorial wall was illuminated by soft lights that made the names glow against the quantum steel surface. Throughout the galaxy, on hundreds of worlds, similar memorials honored the crew of the Persistence and the impossible alliance that had saved a generation. But the true memorial wasn't carved in stone or steel. It lived in the laughter of children from 17 different species, in the cooperation between former enemies, and in the simple understanding that some things, like the future of the young, were worth any sacrifice. The collective had tried to eliminate biological chaos from the galaxy. Instead, they had created something even more chaotic and beautiful. A galactic civilization where love was stronger than logic, where protecting children mattered more than ancient grudges, and where former enemies could become the fiercest guardians of each other's young. In the end, that may have been humanity.